There's an enemy that's been with you your whole life. And it knows every weakness you have, because it was right there when you first picked each one up. It's the thing that's quietly broken your promises, talked you out of your own plans, walked you into the exact things you swore you were finished with. And in all these years, you have never once seen its face. There's an old name for it, the nafs. And one man spent his life learning its moods and disguises better than almost anyone who ever lived, a teacher named Al-Ghazali. But here's the part that stops you. After all that study, after mapping every trick this thing has, Al-Ghazali landed somewhere that sounds backwards. Whatever you do, he taught, don't ever try to kill it. And by the end of this, you're going to understand why the fiercest thing inside you was never meant to die. Let me start with something you already know, because you've lived it. Some night, you make yourself a promise. Tomorrow I stop. Tomorrow I begin. The diet, the prayer, the early morning, the conversation you keep putting off. And you meant it. You really meant it. And then by the next evening, somehow it was already broken. So sit for a second with the question we usually rush straight past. Who broke it? Nobody forced you, and there was no one else in the room. You broke a promise you made to your own self, which means one part of you made that promise and some other part of you quietly tore it up. That second part is exactly what Al-Ghazali was pointing at. Not a devil on your shoulder, not some demon from outside, a self living inside your own self. Hungry, restless, and so good at talking you into things. Modern life has its own words for this. Self-sabotage, no willpower being your own worst enemy. Al-Ghazali would probably just smile at all of it. He was mapping this same opponent 1,000 years ago. And here's the part almost nobody tells you. This self goes by 3 different names because it changes as you work on it. The first name is a warning. The second, strangely, is good news. And the third is the whole destination. Hold on to that, we'll get there. There's a saying that's been carried down for over 1,000 years. An army was coming home from battle, exhausted, the dust still on their faces, the worst of it finally behind them, and they were told they had just come back from the smaller struggle to the greater one. And the soldiers were stunned. What could possibly be greater than the thing they just barely survived? The struggle, came the answer, against your own self. Now, whether those exact words go all the way back to the Prophet himself is something scholars still debate, but the saying kept getting repeated for a reason. It names the thing every honest person works out eventually. The hardest opponent you will ever face isn't out there somewhere. It's the one who wakes up in your own bed. And this is where Rumi comes in. Yes, the same Rumi who wrote so tenderly about love. He described this opponent with an image meant to unsettle you. The nafs, he wrote in the Masnavi, is a dragon. And if yours seems quiet, if you've started to believe you've beaten it, look closer, because it isn't dead. It's only frozen, numbed by the cold, just waiting for its chance. A man with no money is sure he's beaten greed. A man with no power is sure he's humble. And then the money finally arrives, or the title, or the first small taste of being obeyed, and the sun comes out, the ice melts, and the dragon lifts its head warm and alive exactly where it always was. That's the thing both Al-Ghazali and Rumi saw in themselves, and that's what made them who they were. Not that their dragons were smaller than yours, but that they'd stop mistaking the sleep for death. And the disguise is clever. It borrows your own voice. It says, "I deserve this," in the exact tone you'd use for something true. It quotes your own tiredness back to you word for word, and by the time you realize who was actually talking, you've already done what it wanted. Which leaves a frightening question hanging in the air. What do you do with a dragon you cannot see and cannot kill? And this is where the whole path turns away from every war story you have ever been told. Because when Al-Ghazali drew close to this enemy, watching it night after night for years, what he found changes everything. The nafs isn't a monster that invaded you from outside. It's the youngest part of you. Greedy the way a small child is greedy. Frightened the way an animal is frightened. And his conclusion was almost tender. An animal cannot be beaten into being good, but it can be trained. And to train something, the first thing you do is learn its names. The first name comes straight out of the story of the prophet Yusuf. Joseph, Luffer, betrayed by his brothers, sold, tempted, thrown into prison. And right in the middle of that story, the Qur'an gives the self its first name, al-ammara, the commanding self. Surely the self commands to wrong. The verse says, "Unless my Lord shows mercy." This is the nafs, the way most of us first meet it. It doesn't suggest things, it commands them. Eat it. Buy it. Say it. They deserve it. And we obey so fast that we mistake its voice for our own. The second name you'll recognize too. Al-lawwama, the self that blames. It's that thing that stirs at 2 in the morning right after the promise breaks. The regret, the wince, the quiet. Why did I do that again? We treat that voice like our own punisher, but the Qur'an treats it with real honor and swears an oath by the reproaching self. Because the moment you can hear yourself breaking your own word, you're not fully asleep anymore. The blame you hate so much is actually the proof you've begun. The dragon has finally noticed there's a rider on its back. And that right there is the answer to the dragon. You don't fight it head on because you'd lose, and Al-Ghazali knew that better than anyone. He compared the whole work to training an animal. You don't starve a horse to death, because then it can't carry you anywhere, and you don't drop the reins either, because then it carries you off a cliff. Instead, you feed it with measure. You refuse it with patience. Day after day, quietly, with no drama, you teach the strongest thing in you to answer to the deepest thing in you. And that brings us to the third name, al-mutma'inna, the soul at peace. Near the very end of the Quran, there's a verse that has been wept over for centuries. O soul at peace, return to your Lord, well-pleased and well-pleasing. Read it slowly, because the miracle is hiding in plain sight. That is the same soul, the same nafs. The commander was never executed and swapped out for a better one. It was raised the way a wild colt becomes, years later, the calm horse that carries you home. The enemy was the raw material of the peace the entire time. So what does that training actually look like tonight in your real life? It starts smaller than you'd think. Al-Ghazali called it muhasaba, taking account of yourself. There was an early teacher in Baghdad who kept this nightly reckoning so faithfully that history remembers him by it. Al-Muhasibi, the one who takes account. So, try it once. Today, when an urge rises up, the snack you don't need, the scroll you'll regret, the sharp reply, your thumb is already halfway through typing, don't obey it, but don't fight it either. Just watch it, and name it quietly. There you are. That's the command. That isn't me. Then, before you sleep, give yourself one honest minute. Where did it command me today? And where did I follow? No shouting, you don't scream at a colt, you'd only teach it to fear you. Al-Ghazali tamed the fiercest thing in creation with the gentlest tool there is, honest, daily attention. And now you can finally see why he said, never kill it. You can't, and even if you somehow could, you'd be destroying your own strength in the process. Because the fire in the nafs, the wanting, the drive, the hunger, is the very same fire that, once it's trained, becomes courage. It becomes devotion. It becomes the strength to keep loving one person for 50 years. A dead nafs carries nobody anywhere. A trained one carries you the whole way home. So, that enemy that's been with you your whole life, the one that knows every weakness you have, it knows them because it is you, the youngest you, the hungriest you, still commanding, still frightened, still waiting, not for a war, but for a rider. So the next time you break a promise to yourself, don't declare war by morning. Sit down beside the dragon instead. Take account, and take the reins gently. Because Al-Ghazali was right about how this whole thing ends. The self that commands slowly becomes the self that blames. And the self that blames patiently, over time, becomes the self that finally hears the kindest invitation in the entire Qur'an. O soul at peace, return.